Who Owns the Future, Chapter 4, The Ad Hoc Construction of Mass Dignity. The question posed here is, are middle classes natural? Technological progress inevitably inspires demand for greater benefits than it has delivered at a given time. We expect modern medicine to be mishap-free and modern planes to be crash-proof. And yet a century ago, it would have been unimaginable to be even able to want these things. Modern finance similarly pairs benefits with frustrations. So, if finance is imagined as a great fluid of capital flowing out of the world, it will seem to storm and accelerate into great vortices. Just like any large body of fluid, some vortices swirl upward and some downward. It has often been true that the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. Karl Marx spent a preponderance of his energies on observing this tendency, but it did not take a microscope to notice it. And so Marx wanted something that most people, including Jaron Lanier, don't want: a committee to make sure everyone gets what's best for them. Let's reject the Marxist ideal and instead consider the question of whether markets can be counted on to create middle classes as a matter of course. Marx argued that finance was an inherently hopeless technology, and that market systems will always degrade into the rut of plutocracy. So interesting start to this is that technology-wise, first of all, a mindset with that is that wherever we currently are, whatever our current experience is, we always demand more benefits than it has delivered at a given time. So that's where this idea of, I guess we'll get into it a little bit later, but planes, the idea of, or actually I did say that, modern medicine to be mishap-free and modern planes to be crash-proof. But a century ago, to imagine the benefits of planes as they are today would have probably been enough for what they were looking for. So great wealth is naturally persistent, generation to generation, as is deep poverty, but a middle-class status has not proven to be stable without a little help. However, it's possible that digital networks will someday provide a better alternative to these mechanisms and interventions, referring to Keynesian interventions and persistent mechanisms like social safety nets to moderate market outcomes. So there's two familiar distributions that people can be organized into spectrums. One is the star system, or winner-take-all distribution. And so this idea here is like movie stars or rock stars, sports stars, for example. So a very small number of top winners with a long tail of poor performers. So the success is consolidated at the top. So winner-take-all distribution. It's also true for tech startups. Only a few succeed, but those that do can amass stupendous fortunes. And it's the winner-take-all distribution is going to be a kind of like uh, an isolated singular line. But there's another type of distribution that occurs when a middle class is strong and healthy, which is more of a bell curve distribution. So there's a bulge of average people and two tails of exceptional people, one of high and low. So then he gets into talking about, so he's talking about the curves, and then we're into this idea of tweaks to network design can change distributions of outcomes. So winner-take-all distributions come about when there is a global sorting of people within a single framework. Is there anything wrong with the winner-take-all outcomes? Don't they just promote the best of everything for the benefit of everyone? And there definitely are cases where winner-take-all contests are beneficial. It's beneficial to scientists to have special prizes like the Nobel Prize, but broader forms of reward like academic tenure and research grants are vastly more beneficial. So alas, winner-take-all patterns are becoming more common in other parts of our society. The United States, for instance, has famously endured a weakening of the middle class and an extreme rise in income inequality in the network age. Winner-take-all contests should function as the treats in an economy, the cherries on top. To rely on them fundamentally is a mistake, not just a pragmatic or ethical mistake, but also a mathematical one. A star system is just a way of packaging a bell curve. It presents the same information using a different design principle. When used foolishly or excessively, winner-take-all star systems amplify errors and make outcomes less meaningful. Distributions can only be based on measurements, but as in the case of measuring intelligence, the nature of measurement is often complicated and troubled by ambiguities. Consider the problem of noise, or what is known as luck in human affairs. Since the rise of the new digital economy around the turn of the century, there's been a distinct heightening of obsessions with contests like American Idol or other rituals in which an anointed individual will suddenly become rich and famous. So then he gets into some more explanation on the problems there, but I really want to focus on this part in a new section about letting bell curves be bell curves. But star systems in a society come about because of a paucity of influential sorting processes. If there are only 5 contests for stars and only room for 5 of each kind of star, then there can only be 25 stars total. So think about that, across, they're using American Idol, America's Got Talent, the X Factor, shows like that, right? But even in, take that out, zoom out abstractly here and consider, the music industry as representing this. There's really only a handful of profitable genres that people can be stars in, current modern stars. So hip-hop, rap, pop, alternative, and maybe electronic. But even those, it seems like the lines are kind of being blurred. So you only have a few genres that are profitable that you can live off of. And if you're looking in comparison there, pop is the only one, we're seeing that consolidation happening. It's getting more narrow. Pop is really kind of the only way that you can be a total star. Wow, that's hyperbole a little bit. um, to get a bell curve of outcomes, there must be an unbounded variety of paths or sorting processes that can lead to success. That is to say, there must be many ways to be a star. So ultimately what we're establishing here is that a bell curve style that has a strong middle class is ultimately the distribution that we want in our markets. And in order to do that, there needs to be an unbounded variety of paths or sorting processes that can lead to success. So in school book economics, a particular person might enjoy a commercial advantage because of being in a particular place or having special access to some valuable information. In Antinimbosian days, which is before the cloud, a local baker could deliver fresh bread more readily than a distant bread factory, even if the factory bread was cheaper, and factory bread was cheaper. And a local banker could discern who was likely to repay a loan better than a distant analyst could. Each person who found success in a market economy was a local star. Local stars. This is an idea, okay, and this is connected to a thread that I've pulled before on hyper-local focus on, like, again, yeah, having local stars, having, local businesses be stars, like all of that. But don't get hung up on that. I'm just connecting a thought there. Digital networks has thus far been mostly applied to reduce such benefits of locality, and that trend will lead to economic implosion if it isn't altered. This is what I've been talking about with national brands, corporations, operating in such a way that local business can't compete with. That national brands are now somehow both national and local. And we'll get into that more in later chapters. But for now, consider a scenario that could easily unfold in the next century. And this is something that I know is actually being worked on and is real deal. And it's also, just like as a side note, a major motivator, like in space exploration. This is something that they would need. And so you can imagine, and it's easy to understand the idea here, so it can be across any industry, but I just feel like space progress translates to a lot of like everyday progress. If a robot can someday construct or print out another robot at almost no cost, and that robot can bake fresh bread right in your kitchen or at the beach, then both the old bread factory and the local baker will experience the same reduction of routes to success as the recording musician already has. Robotic bread recipes would be shared over the net, just like music files are today. The economic beneficiary would own some distant large computer that spied on everyone who ate bread in order to route advertisements or credit to them. Bread eaters would get bargains, it's true, but those would be more than canceled out by the reduced prospects. And here's where I noted that even the advertising world is operating in this like cannibalizing way. So that speaks more to the reduction of benefits of locality. That, wow, yeah, and I guess he is calling that out, but as advertisers get better at identifying individuals and location-based strategies, it pushes out small business. That's an argument that I've been making for a while. But also, and then this is a great example of how the successful people today, even the wealthy, let's just call it that, don't understand that they're operating against their best interest, because advertising is consolidating all of the benefits of advertising to the highest spenders, and at the same time, that is essentially killing competition and therefore additional revenue streams for advertising. Which is why, okay, and then you can tie this into now like a company like Walmart that has Walmart Connect, which is basically an internal advertising agency. If the company has the resources, they can just create this agency, cut out the middleman, and do it themselves. Wow, we gotta fucking break up. Walmart needs to be checked. Okay. The fatal conundrum of a hyper-efficient market optimized to yield star system results is that it will not create enough of a middle class to support a real market dynamic. Like, all of this, like you can point to all of this, right? We have the evidence to say that it's objectively bad for our future. And in the only sense that it's good is that people can make money off of it right now. Like, it's only good right now, but in the future, it's definitely bad. Even if factories and banks are made obsolete, and this is likely to happen in this century, the underlying principle will still apply. It is an eternal truth, not an artifact of the digital age. I'm gonna have to go back and, sorry. So to go back to that fatal conundrum of hyper-efficient market to yield, a market economy cannot thrive absent the well-being of average people, even in a gilded age. Gilding cannot float. It must reside on a substrate. Factories must have multitudes of customers. Banks must have multitudes of reliable borrowers. So that's where we get into, even if factories and banks are made obsolete. The prominence of middle classes in the last century actually made the rich richer than would have a quest to concentrate wealth absolutely. So a good example of that here, which is, I hate to give him any kind of props, and maybe I don't know, maybe I need to like get into his world, but Henry Ford, for instance, made a point of pricing his earliest mass-produced cars so that his own factory workers could afford to buy them. It is that balance that creates economic growth and thus opportunity for more wealth. Even the ultra-rich are best served by a bell-curve distribution of wealth in a society with a healthy middle class. Like, I love that, and it seems like common sense, and I think truth appeals to common sense. Like, if you're producing something, how hypocritical is it when you produce something that your own workers can't afford? Because that also implies a definite choice. It's just crazy. So, anyway, don't be greedy. An artificial bell curve made of levees. Before digital networks, eras of technological development often favored winner-take-all results. Railroads enthroned railroad barons, oil fields, oil barons. Digital networks, however, do not intrinsically need to repeat this pattern. Levees are broad dams of modest altitude intended to hold back the natural flow of fluid to protect something precious. A mountain of them rising in the middle of the economy might be visualized as a mountain of rice paddies. Middle-class levees came in many forms. Most developed countries opted to emphasize government-based levies, though the ability to pay for social safety nets is now strained in most parts of the developed world by austerity measures taken to alleviate the financial crisis that began in 2008. Some levies were pseudo-governmental. In the 20th century, an American form of levy creation leveraged tax policy to encourage middle-class investment in homes and, at the time, conservative market positions like individual retirement accounts. So then there's also hard-won levies, academic tenure, union membership, taxi medallion ownership, copyrights, patents, and more. And then industries also arose to sell middle-class levies like insurance. So none of these were perfect. None of them did well in isolation. A successful middle-class life typically relied on more than one form of levy. And that's a big part of why capitalism has thrived. The senseless ideal of a perfectly pure market. This is an interesting section. So something obvious needs to be pointed out because of the historical moment in which this book is being written. It will probably be read as a silly diversion to future readers during saner times. There's a shrill, shattering global debate that pits government against markets or politics against money. In Europe, should financial considerations from the point of view of German lenders trump political considerations from Greek borrowers? In the United States, a huge wave of so-called populist ideology declares that government is the problem and markets are the answer. To all of this, I say I am a technologist and neither position makes sense to me. Technologies are never perfect. They always need tweaks. And that right there kind of captures like the section and kind of a next big portion of this chapter. But really, again, just he's kind of mastering the duh here. If we think of our markets as, technologies abstractly, or, in whatever way, it's just insane that we would consider, first of all, something so complex to be perfect. Like, rarely is anything perfect. So why would we assume, why would we put all of our stock into this idea that it is perfect? Being an absolutist is a certain way to become a failed technologist. Markets are, okay, here it is. Markets are an information technology. A technology is useless if it can't be tweaked. If market technology can't be fully automatic and needs some buttons, okay, I gotta do the whole thing. You might, for example, want to design a tablet to be pristine and platonic without any physical buttons, but only a touchscreen. Wouldn't that be more perfect and true to the ideal? But you can't ever quite do it. Some extra physical buttons to turn the thing on, for instance, turn out to be indispensable. Being an absolutist is a certain way to become a failed technologist. So then the markets are an information technology, and it's useless if it can't be tweaked. If it can't be fully automatic and needs some buttons, then there's no use in trying to pretend otherwise. You don't stay attached to poorly performing quest for perfection. You fix bugs. And there are bugs. We just went through taxpayer-funded bailouts of networked finance in much of the world, and no amount of austerity seems enough to fully pay for that. So the technology needs to be tweaked. Wanting to tweak a technology shows commitment to it, not a rejection of it. I love this. I noted, like, how does he do it? I love it. I love that reframe so much, and it's something that I want to try to adopt. Because it's the frustration that I have with so many, like, wanting to tweak, wanting to make something better doesn't mean that I'm rejecting the thing. It's that I want to make it better. I'm an optimist about how, about its potential. I'm not criticizing it at its core value. I'm criticizing our inability to, or our inability to access its full potential, something along those lines. Please don't pretend there's some pure form of capitalism we should be faithful to. There isn't. And income is different from wealth. During the mortgage craze of the baby years of the 21st century, there was a popular book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Millions of people chased after this magical thing enjoyed by the rich, not mere income, but wealth. And I've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I kind of feel a similar snarkiness about it. I think I had at one point gone through, and that was also during the era where I was willing to get into sales. I had given up on, like, my ideals and my morals, and was like, I just got to make money. And in hindsight, like, it's clearly not great wisdom. So anyway, rich people typically earn money from capital. They have invested in real estate, stocks, or more rarefied opportunities, and money sloughs out of those positions. The rich have internalized a psychology of finance as opposed to accounting. Another way to put it, the rich enjoys big levies in the flow. Levies grow naturally and gracefully at the upper extremes of wealth. Wealth, for the most successful people, becomes like the ocean that rivers empty into after a great storm of commercial transformation. It is easier to stay rich than to get rich. The still missing piece of the puzzle of capitalism is how to create a less ad hoc, more organic middle class sustaining form of wealth, as opposed to mere income. The ideal mechanism would be fluid enough to reward creativity and not turn it into a moribund power base for committees. Design ought to nonetheless be tough enough to withstand inevitable giant hurricanes of capital flow, which will surely appear as new technologies unfold in this century. It ought to be graceful and ordinary and not dependent on all or nothing life events like getting into a union. A robust solution would be scalable, meaning that it would be strengthened, not weakened, as more and more people embrace it. The beneficiaries of middle-class sustaining levies have been subject to assault from two directions. And then he kind of explains that, but what might seem to a worker like security can seem to an employer or an investor like a blockade on the corrective mechanisms of the market. So this is like a union, for example. A worker is going to see a union as security, and the employer is going to see that as a blockade. In the strongest union towns, it was almost impossible to perform. In places like Chicago, I would be forbidden from plugging equipment together on stage. That was a job for a union member, except no union member had ever dealt with shape sensing optical fiber bundles or wiring for magnetic field generators that were needed to track parts of performers' bodies. So we would hit an impasse. It was absurd. So the union seemed at the moment to stand in the way of both personal expression and technological progress. And yet I appreciate how unions came to be and how important they have been. Next to every levee is a battle trench. What might be called upper-class levies, like exclusive investment funds, have been known to blur into Ponzi schemes or other criminal enterprises. And the same pattern exists for levies at all levels. Criminals easily exploited certain classic middle-class levies. The mob famously infiltrated unions and repurposed music royalties as money laundering scheme. Okay, interesting comparison. Like, how is music like a mortgage? The principal way a powerful, unfortunately designed digital network flattens levies is by enabling data copying. For instance, a gamer app that can't easily be copied, perhaps because it's locked in a hardware ecosystem, can typically be sold for more online than a file that contains music, because that kind can be more easily copied. There's an endless debate about whether file sharing is stealing, but we're going to avoid that for now because, and to get ahead of that argument, he's saying that we shouldn't pirate files, but it's premature to condemn people who do it today. It would be unfair to demand that people cease sharing or pirating files when those same people are not paid for their participation in very lucrative network schemes. Ordinary people are relentlessly spied on and not compensated for information taken from them. But I would like to see everyone eventually pay for music and the like. I would not ask for it until there is reciprocity, which I think is huge here. And I agree, and that's a good, I guess, neutral position to be in. Is basically like, it sucks that musicians are put into this position, but at the same time, everyday people are also exploited by that too, and they're exploited in other ways as well, and might even be exploited in the same way in their own field. So it's a systematic flaw, and you can't expect the individuals to hold that responsibility. And essentially what they're doing by copying today is that also hurts the system. So yeah, what matters most is whether we are contributing to a system that would be good for us all in the long term. If you never knew the music business as it was, the loss of what it used to be a significant middle-class job pool might not seem important. I will demonstrate, however, that we should perceive an early warning for the rest of us. Copying a musician's music ruins economic dignity. It doesn't necessarily deny the musician of any form of income, but it does mean that the musician is restricted to a real-time economic life. That's getting paid to perform, but not paid for the music. And that kind of lends us into the peasant's dilemma, which is the peasant's dilemma is that there's no buffer. A musician who is sick or old or who has a sick kid cannot perform and cannot earn. A few musicians, a very tiny number, will do well. But even the most successful real-time only careers can fall apart suddenly because of a spate of bad luck. Meanwhile, some third-party spy service like a social network or search engine will invariably create persistent wealth from the information that is copied, the recordings. All right, well, I guess I might have been wrong. I guess by copying, you hurt the record labels, but there's a third party that benefits from it that will perpetuate this issue. Please note how similar music is to mortgages. And this is key. If someone's saying, please note this, it's significant. And he does end up saying that once it clicks for you, this is one of those things that I try to express when I'm writing or conveying a message. Once it clicks for you, you can't unsee it. It hasn't totally clicked for me yet, but I think I'm getting close. When a mortgage is leveraged and bundled into complex, undisclosed securities by unannounced third parties over a network, then the homeowner suffers a reduced chance at access to wealth. And the owner's promise to repay the loan is copied, like the musician's file, many times. So this is like what fractional reserve banking is. And it's this intersection of that, the credit system, that and the credit system. And so when you have that promise to pay, the bank copies that and uses it to create money out of thin air. And it's copied over and over and translates to the different financial sectors. And one of those sectors will be credit. And so what ends up happening is so many copies of the wealth creating promise specific to the homeowner are created that the value of the homeowner's original copy is reduced. The copying reduces the homeowner's long-term access to wealth. This is super fucked up. Okay, to put it another way, the promise of the homeowner to repay the loan can only be made once, but that promise and the risk that the loan will not be repaid can be received innumerable times. Therefore, the homeowner will end up paying for that amplified risk somehow. And it will eventually turn into higher taxes to bail out a financial concern that is too big to fail. Reduced property values in a neighborhood burdened by stupid mortgages, and reduced access to credit. Access to credit becomes scarce for all but those who with the absolute tip-top credit ratings, once all of the remote recipients of the promise to repay have amplified risk. Once you see it is so clear, a mortgage is similar to a music file. A securitized mortgage is similar to a pirated music file. In either case, no immediate harm was done to the person who once upon a time stood to gain a levy benefit. Nothing but an abstract copy has been created, a silent small change far away. In the long term, the real people at the source are harmed. All right, so just to wrap our head around that a little bit more, this idea of copying, It shows up everywhere. You have this promise to repay it with the bank, and then the credit system has that under file. So then this promise to repay affects this promise to pay over time, right? It's then reflected in credit, which then makes you a riskier person for anything else, which is fine. Like it kind of logically makes sense, but when the system starts to fracture, it gets exposed that that's not an ideal, like having that be the primary structure is flawed. Maybe there's a way for that to function somehow, but as it currently stands, it doesn't work because, take a mortgage, for example, or student loan debt. Like, that's what I've been saying, where we're enslaved to debt for our entire lives. Like, that's the problem with the system. And it starts early and earlier for each coming generation. So that's where I've discussed the idea of the goalpost being moved on qualifications for employment and stuff like that. But like, you get a mortgage, or you take on student loan debt, right? And with that credit, that promise to repay, your credit gets dinged and makes you a riskier person for additional opportunities. So then the people who even if it's going to take them, I don't know, 20 years to pay off their student loans, right? At the 10-year mark, they want to take on a mortgage, right? They already have that, that risk on their credit from the student loans, but which means they don't get the premium. Those people with tip-top perfect credit are going to get the premium mortgage rates, right? So they are at a disadvantage then to obtain that, but they continue on with it anyway. So then they get the mortgage at the less than ideal mortgage rates. And again, it's a cycle there, where then, okay, you have two promises to pay in the future, and that kind of compoundingly negatively affects your credit as well. So yeah, that's all very interesting. Yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that. That was a long